Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Tyrion Stark. Cat welcomed her good brother warmly after he dismounted, sweeping him into her embrace. She had loved Brandon when he lived, and had come to love Ned just as much. But her love for Benjen was different. She loved him like a sister loved a brother. He had always been the perfect uncle to all of her children, as well as Jon, and was a great man in general, kind and honorable. "Welcome home," she said as she pulled away. "It's good to be back, Cat," Benjen said with a smile on his face. He looked around. "Jon told me what happened. I'm glad to see Winterfell as it is now, and not what it was then. The builders have worked hard to repair the damage." Cat nodded. "I think they have done a good job." Benjen glanced at the stables, which were overflowing at the moment with horses. Darren Rose, the new lord of Moat Kylan, was the latest to arrive. His presence brought the total number of northern nobles over 15. "I see my message was received," he said, his warm smile icing over. "By very many," Cat said. "They are all curious to see why they have been summoned." "They will know soon enough," Benjen said grimly, looking up at the sky. It was a cloudy day, but the sun still managed to shine weakly. It was a rare day where the freezing northern breeze wasn't blowing so hard. "Can you have them assembled in the Great Hall? I must speak with Bran for a moment." Cat raised her eyebrow. "I will see it done. You'll find Bran in the Godswood." Benjen nodded. "I will be there soon." Cat looked over her good brother's shoulder at the massive, chain-wrapped chest attached to his saddle. "Should I send servants to bring that to your room?" she asked. Benjen shook his head. "Leave it, please. No one is to touch it, but me." Cat was surprised but nodded nonetheless. "Very well. I will gather the others and wait for you in the Great Hall." "Thank you, Cat," Benjen said, nodding briefly to her before guiding his horse away towards the Godswood. "My lady," Karen, her steward, said behind her. He was a good man, smart, and observant. He could be as quiet as a mouse until it was time to take command, where his voice would snap like a whip. "Please tell the lords that the first ranger has asked for their presence in the Great Hall," Cat said, turning to the steward. "Also place someone on the battlements looking south." "If I may ask, for what reason?" Karen asked curiously. "Lord Howland Reed has not arrived," Cat answered, walking towards the keep. "If he does come, take him straight to the Great Hall." "I will see it done," Karen said with a bow before leaving to do his duty. Line break. Cat sat on the throne of Winter, the throne on which her husband usually sat when holding court or dealing justice. It was the throne from where the Starks of old ruled the vast north. It did not have the striking appearance or history of the Iron Throne, but it held an ancient power of its own. The Starks are one of the most ancient houses in all of Westeros. With age and prestige like that, power will always come with it. Crowding either side of the hall were nobles from all across the north, Umbers and Corstarks, Mormonts and Hawkers, Foresters and Glovers. So many had answered Benjen's summons, though Cat was no surprised by that. The lords of the north would never dare ignore the summons from the Night's Watch, especially since the man who had summoned them was a Stark. All had the same question burning in their minds. What did he want to show them? Cat heard the sound of squeaking wood that announced the arrival of Bran. Her second son was being helped by Hodor and had Arya by his side. The two had been spending a surprising amount of time together in the Godswood, doing only the gods knew what. Between her time with Bran, her lessons with Serio, and her lessons with Byron, Arya barely had time to eat or sleep. Cat had been hoping to sit down with the girl and find out what was going on, but since she was always called away to deal with her husband's job and Arya always seemed to disappear as soon as she arrived, Cat never had the chance. The double doors opened and Benjen marched on, the heavy chest that had been on his saddle being balanced on his shoulder. When he reached the center of the room, he set the chest down and looked around the room. "Thank you, my lords and ladies, for coming," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "I am glad to see so many have answered my call." "You said that there was a threat," Amber rumbled, crossing his arms. "Of course, we came." "Even still, I thank you," Benjen said, nodding towards the massive lord. "I would ask that you all prepare yourselves for what you're about to see. Your reaction may be to attack, but I ask that you stay your hand. Draw your weapon if you must, but remain where you are." "What's in the chest, Benjen?" Lord Karstark asked. You would not believe me if you did not see it with your own eyes, Benjen said, digging out a key from his cuff. You have been warned. Kat found herself leaning forward slightly as Benjen unlocked the giant lock that held the chains in place. The room was silent except for the rattling sound coming from the chains as they were dropped to the ground, releasing their hold on the chest. With a kick, Benjen pushed the chest on its back, allowing the lid to be thrown open. Kat recoiled in her seat as the monster leaped forward, only to be pulled back by the chain wrapped around its neck. Her hand came up in a defensive gesture as two guards rushed forward, placing themselves between her and the creature, leveling their pikes at it. What in the hells have you done, Benjen? The Great Jon roared, his great sword held in his hands as he struggled to keep himself from hacking the creature to pieces. What is that fucking thing? Hold, my lord, Benjen ordered, the only one who looked remotely calm. This is the threat I speak of. What is it? Daisy asked, her mace in her hands. Her sister, Alicine, also looked ready to attack. A white if I am not mistaken. A new voice said. Lord Howland Reed, accompanied by a frightened and confused couple and a massive warrior, stepped into the room. The young blonde man behind him had his sword pointed at the creature while the tall, auburn-haired girl gripped his other arm. Behind them was the massive man in battered black armor holding a greatsword. He also held a protective arm in front of the girl. Kat's gaze skipped over the Lord of Greywater Watch and over the new Lord of the Vale, and onto her daughter. She had not expected her daughter to appear, and her heart somehow managed to flip with joy at the sight of her. It was always nice to receive Sansa's letter, but nothing was better than seeing the girl herself. It is, Benjen said, nodding to Howland and his companions. I went north of the wall searching for one to bring back south. Everyone needs to know what is out there, and that more are coming. War? Lord Roland growled, planting his greatsword point down on the flagstones. How many more? I'm not sure, Benjen admitted, but I do know, for sure, that the long night is returning. Silence reigned over the hall. Kat's first instinct was to declare it blasphemy, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Ulsha had been warning both her and Eddard for months. Now her good brother had the undead evidence to prove it. There was no way anyone could deny it now. What would you have us do? She asked, composing herself. She felt several surprised glances on her, but she ignored them all. She came to Winterfell several years ago as a wide-eyed Riverlander, but she was of the North now. More importantly, she was a Stark. Prepare, Benjen answered, retrieving his knife from his belt. This creature has a few weaknesses. Fire and dragonglass are two. Valyrian steel is another. Alysanne Mormont stepped forward and held her sword near the creature. The white shied away from the blade, hissing and snapping as if the metal was burning it. Daisy's sister snarled and pulled the blade away. This is what the wildlings are running from, she said, looking at the others. From what I've heard, the wildlings have been attacked by the others for years. There's no telling how many corpses have been brought back to fill their filthy ranks. How can we fight against these things when we can barely put together 10,000 men? Lord Glover asked, how can we make it through the winter trying to feed our army? Have peace, my lord, Benjen said. The North will not fight alone. I mean to continue south and show every kingdom what I have shown you here today. Do not forget, the king is of the North. He will not leave us to fight this battle alone. The free folk will fight as well, Osha said, stepping forward. Mance Rayder has 100,000 men right now on the wrong side of the wall. If they can get south, they will fight to defend it. Asasa's statement was not met with much excitement. Catelyn knew that the woman meant well with her statement, but hearing that the men of the North would be fighting shoulder to shoulder with men they considered to be rapists and thieves was not a pleasant one. Many lords, especially those who lived close to the wall, muttered and looked side-eyed at each other. Rachel, Rickard Karstark, Daisy Mormont, all looked distrustful of the wildling woman and her promise. Why would they do that? Lord Karstark asked with grim curiosity. Because they want to live just as much as all of you. Oshai answered fiercely. Yes, the free folk and those south of the wall have been enemies for generations. But this is different. This is not us against you. This is the living against the dead. The conversation came to a standstill as eyes looked around the hall, waiting for someone to either continue the discussion or branch off into a new topic. It was clear that Benjen and Osha had said their parts. Some looked towards the Greatjon or Lord Karstark, the most vocal and more respected northern lords to speak. This was clearly a martial matter. My lords, return to your homes and prepare for when my husband or the king summons you to defend the wall, Cat said, breaking the silence finally. Lord Glover, you asked me when you arrived, where my husband was. He is at the wall dealing with the free folk and the Night's Watch. They will find a solution that will see the free folk south of the wall so that they are not left to the others. The northern lords looked amongst each other before nodding. The Greatson, as always, was their voice. My lady, we will all be ready to stand with Ned and Jon at the wall when we are called, he said firmly. Isn't that right? The northern lords pounded their fists on the table, making the wood jump and rattle. Now the men were getting themselves worked into a frenzy. They knew who their enemy was. They knew where the fight would be. They knew that the Starks of Winterfell would lead them. They were ready to fight then and there. The long night comes, my lords, Benjen bellowed. Will you stand and defend the realm? Aye, the northern lords roared. Eddard Stark, Barik Magnar knelt before Ned, looking like half a bear in his great fur cloak. His axe was laid at Ned's feet as an offering. When he spoke, it sounded like a mountain breaking, thunderous and booming. Jon stood off to the side, his arms crossed as he witnessed the oath. The three of them stood in the shadow of the tunnel, under the wall, away from Thorne's prying eyes. The Septas are at your command, Eddard of Clan Stark, descendant of Bran the Builder, Beric promised. We will fight for you to the last man against the forces of darkness, just as we did during the long night. I speak for Clans Krauls Stain, Magnar, and all warriors of Skagos. Ned nodded. Stand Beric of Clan Magnar. Your oath has been recognized. The Skagosi lord pushed himself to his feet, slinging his axe across his back as he did. What is your command? Gather your kinsmen and prepare more weapons of dragonglass, Ned said, drawing the stone dagger that the Skagosi lord had given him. I will send a messenger when it is time for battle. The massive man bowed deeply. We will be ready with axe and arrow, he swore, thumping his chest with one ham-sized fist before marching off. Ned weighed the dagger in his hand, glancing between it and the Skagosi, before sheathing the blade and looking at Jon. That went well, he grunted as the two Starks made their way out of the snow and into the warmth of the king's tower. I remember when Beric gave me his oath when I returned to Winterfell after the rebellion. I thought nothing of it at the time. The people of the north have many age-old traditions that began long before the Andal invasion. I thought the Skagosi oath was just another such tradition. Ned shook his head. I was wrong. Jon shrugged as the two men leaned against the curved wall, looking out the frost-covered window that looked out over the courtyard. Septa Alazar paced back and forth in front of the winch cage, watching as the men of the Night's Watch drilled. Ned had to admit, the black-garbed warriors looked ready for battle. They were disciplined and capable warriors. It also helped that the majority of new recruits were soldiers who had fought in the War of the Five Kings. These were not just criminals who chose the wall over beheading, but men from the Crownlands, Westerlands, Riverlands, and the North who had chosen the wrong side of the fight. How do you plan to convince Thorne to let the wildlings through? Jon asked curiously, crossing his arms. Ned shook his head. It's a complicated matter, he admitted. I can place Mance and his people on the gift. I'm sure Robb would be fine with it, but there's no way Alliser would open the tunnel beneath the wall for them. They can't go through East Watch or the Shadow Tower. Jon sighed. It'll take too long to move 100,000 people that far and then settle them. They're here now and they need to get through and settle. The more we delay, the more we're fucked when the enemy attacks. I know, Ned said heavily. Do you think you know Mance? What do you mean? Jon asked. Do you think you know Mance Rayder well? Ned elaborated.
Jon raised an eyebrow. I met him once, father.
Ned nodded. Fair point. Why do you ask? I was wondering if Mance would really use the horn to tear down the wall, Ned said. It's our best defense against the enemy, and because of Thorne we may lose it. Jon was quiet for a moment, before speaking again. His tone was thoughtful and full of hesitation. What if we convince some of the brothers to open the gate under the wall for us? He asked slowly. It was Ned's turn to raise an eyebrow. You mean ask them to go against their Lord Commander? Jon grimaced. Ned's tone had been less than responsive to the idea. You don't agree with the idea? I have my apprehensions, Ned replied. After his time in King's Landing, during his terrible time as Hand, Ned's opinion of political maneuvering went from hate to loathing. What Jon is suggesting is exactly what Littlefinger did to Ned. turning what he thought were his allies into his enemies. In this case, Lazar was Ned and the brothers of the Night's Watch were the Gold Cloaks. Is it not better to ask forgiveness than permission? Jon asked before shaking his head. Horrible example. Ned said nothing. Father, what I'm trying to say is that we need to act instead of sitting on our hands, having pointless arguments with Sir Alistair. Jon said, trying again. I have some friends amongst the brothers. I think I can convince them to open the gate and let Mance and his people through. How would you convince them? Ned asked. When I returned to Castle Black and was confronted by Thorne, Gren pointed out that the Lord Commander was almost denying the existence of the others, even after he was shown a white. Jon explained, I think there are some here that understand what's happening and what's coming. That might be enough to get them to open the gate. Were you told why Thorne dismisses the others? Ned asked. Benjen has shown the white to him. Thorne was the one who allowed him to go north and find it. Jon shook his head. I'm not sure. There is the chance that Thorne can't separate his hatred for the wildlings with his understanding of the others. Go on. Jon sucked on his teeth. Thorne sees them both as his enemy. He can't distinguish between the two. Ned sighed, fearing that Jon was right, but there was more than he was missing. There would be consequences. Jon, not just for us, but also for those who help us. Turncloaks are killed here. Jon nodded. Is there a chance you could protect them? Ned shook his head. It would cast a pall over our house. Jon, do you remember when I executed the deserter? Right before Robert arrived. Jon nodded again. I do. As Lord of Winterfell, I cannot place the law upon one man and not for another. That's not justice, Ned said. I, above all my bannermen, must uphold the law. Right. Jon sighed. I'll do what I can with Thorne, Ned promised. Can you handle Mance? Yes, Jon said. And if talking doesn't work? Ned didn't answer his question. He couldn't. He didn't have an answer. Margaery Stark. Margaery frowned as she read over the latest report. It was from a minor lord in the Crownlands who did not appreciate the, slaughter that Ser Rolland Storm inflicted upon the Faith militant near his hold. He was a rather religious fellow who keeps his septon near to his ear at all times. He was demanding that Ser Rolland make a public apology to the Faith for his treatment of what the man called the Holy Commoners.
Is it that boar again?
What's his name? Tira? Grandmother asked, popping a date into her mouth. Since Robb set sail for the Wall, Margaery has enlisted the help of her grandmother as she worked through reports. Normally she would have Tyrion's help, but since he was dealing with Sam and his father Lord Tarly as they worked through preparations for the long night, along with Margaery's work, he was unavailable. So, as it stood, Margaery and her grandmother had taken over most of Robb's work, while Tyrion dealt with some of Robb and Margaery's work as well as his own. The king, meanwhile, was sailing north to deal with the impending army of the undead and ice demons.
He's not the only one.
Margaery sighed, setting the message aside. He's the 10th lord who has complained about our treatment of the faith. There are even knights within the city who have had some choice words about the punishments placed upon the faith and the new High Septon. Tyrion had once again shown his worth when he had drafted a set of rules that had severely limited the power and reach of the faith. The first punishment had been 1.5 million golden dragons to be paid to the crown. Tyrion had even gone so far as to call it a penance for their sins, a phrase that had caused the other members of the small council to share a hearty laugh. The move itself was simply marvelous, as it saw the crown's debt to the Iron Bank settled as well as the coffers filled with the extra 100,000 coins. The hand's list had also included limiting what septons preaching in the city could say. Anything that was considered hate speech, such as denouncing other religions, would see the septon confined to the Sept of Baelor for a week. Any further incidents would see the offending septon thrown in a cell for a week. The final punishment, and perhaps the worst for the faith, was that they would no longer be as protected by the Iron Throne as they had been since the first faith militant uprising. It was a clever play by Tyrion that would certainly keep the faith on their toes for years to come, as they would be forced to hold their tongues, since they couldn't raise men to protect themselves. They no longer held any power over the crown, no special privileges or desires. As of now, the faith would be treated no better or no worse than any common man. The new High Septon had been delivered the list personally by Tyrion, supported by the Kingsguard and 20 men-at-arms. The High Septon Tyrion had been the very image of a humble man, accepting the terms without so much of a whimper or complaint. He had done so alone without any septon supporting him.
There's nothing we can do about that, Grandmother said.
Lord Lancer's terms prevent the faith from militarizing those men, or any men for that matter. Surely there is some way we can appease them, Margaery asked. Accept the things you cannot change. The courage to change the things you can, Grandmother said, quoting the first two lines of an old psalm, and the wisdom to know the difference. Margaery sighed, finishing the line. Thank you. Grandmother simply nodded, and went back to carving her cheese. Sister? Loras's voice came through the door. You have a visitor. Show them in, Margaery ordered, composing herself. There were a dozen people she would expect to visit her while she worked, but the Green Man was not on that list.
Lord Highsmith, Margaery greeted.
The fabled guardian of the Isle, Grandmother mused. Come to show us your glowing eyes and booming voice. The Green Man smiled slightly, an odd look on his rough features. As sharp as your wagging tongue is. I am not here for you, Queen of Thorns. I have come to speak with your progeny. What is the matter, my lord? Margaery asked, leaning forward. The strange man had mainly kept to himself since he arrived in the capital. The only times Margaery had heard of him conversing with anyone was with the Grand Maester, his speech in the small council chambers, and apparently he also spoke with Daenerys Targaryen as well. I am no lord, my lady, the Green Man said. Bren is just fine. Very well, Bren, Margaery said. What can I help with? Nothing, your grace, Bren said, folding his hands behind his back. I wanted to thank you for the crown's hospitality, and that I will be leaving tomorrow morning. Oh? Margaery asked curiously. My peers have been busy, my lady, Bren began to say before Grandmother cut him off. Awakening the deep forests, Grandmother said, paraphrasing what the Green Man had said during the small council meeting. Bren Highsmith's smile grew a little. Where some men might be unnerved by Margaery's grandmother and her sharp tongue, the Green Man seemed to find her extremely amusing, almost like a large warhorse regarding a little fiery puppy. Aye, that, Bren continued. They are searching for old allies, while I am more focused on new ones.
New ones?
Margaery asked. She was beginning to wonder how Robb spent days with the man. Margaery would have been driven mad by his vague way of speaking, just as she was now. Do not wonder, your grace, Bren said, as if reading Margaery's mind. Worry about what you have here. I will reunite with the king when it is time. Margaery nodded. Very well. Is there anything we can help with? Supplies? Maybe armor or weapons? No need, my lady, Bren said. I have already taken care of that. I am simply here to thank you before I ride out. Thank you for the courtesy, Margaery said kindly. Travel safely. The old gods are clearly with you, Grandmother added with an amused smile. They are always with us, my lady, Bren said, before striding out of the room. When he was gone and the door was closed, Margaery looked at her grandmother, who was still staring at the door. Do you think we can trust him? Margaery asked. I believe so, Grandmother replied. I have always had a healthy skepticism of septons. They sit high and mighty on their religion. Followers of the old gods, however, their religion is not their personality. What do you mean? Margaery asked. Followers of the old gods keep their religion to themselves. They have no priests, no temples. They are influenced by who they are as people, not their gods. Grandmother explained, the opposite of the followers of the Seven. Robb seems to trust him, Margaery said thoughtfully. The king understands how important he is. Grandmother said, we're fighting demons, my dear. Perhaps these green men will be our angels. Jon Stark. Jon kept the hood on his borrowed cloak up as one of the other watchmen shuffled past him, bundled in furs to keep out the worst of the bone-biting cold. Jon lowered his head and raised his hands, warming them against the brazier. His eyes flitted back and forth, terrified that he was about to be caught. He was supposed to be asleep in the room next to his father's, preparing to meet with Mance Rayder in the morning. Unbeknownst to his father, and several others, Jon had met with Mance the night before, where the two men had a very short and productive conversation. It was very much like the conversation Jon had had 2 nights ago with 5 brothers of the Night's Watch, men who had arrived at the wall with Jon, but unlike him, had taken the black. Flashback.
Right, I got him, Gren grunted as he led the 4 other men into the room.
Behind him followed Ed, Pipe-Toed, and Stony. All 4 men had been a part of Jon's group when they were preparing to take the Black. Their friendship had gotten off to a rocky start after Jon thrashed Ned and Toad in the sparring ground. He had been trained by Ser Roderick, and none of them had even picked up a sword before that point. A 3-against-1 fight was still unfair, since Jon was undoubtedly one of the best warriors in Castle Black before he had even taken the Black. However, some wise words had shown Jon that he should help the lads get better instead of showing off his skill. They, and a few others, were the only good thing that Jon experienced during his brief time at Castle Black years ago. They were his friends, and he had abandoned them to fight alongside Robb in the Riverlands. Thankfully, Gren and the others understood and harbored no ill feelings towards Jon. "What's the matter?" Ed asked, crossing his arms. "The Lord Commander won't let the wildlings under the wall," Jon said, gazing at the 5 men. "I'm sure you all know why that's a problem." They all nodded. Like Gren, they had all seen the white that the first ranger had brought south. That was all it took for them to believe that the long night was coming, and then an army of the dead was marching south. None were exactly godly men, and facts and logic made a lot of sense to them. One half of an undead creature was all they needed. "I mean to let them through," Jon said, making his intention clear. He wasn't like Margaery or Tyrion. He couldn't dance around a subject with words the way they could. And with men like this, men who had spent years in a bleak, frozen hell, it was better to just get right to the point. "And you want us to help you?" Toad said, crossing his arms. "What's in it for us?" "They kill you for treason," he added fearfully. "It's a death sentence. As Lord of Long Lake, I can protect you," Jon promised. "The Night's Watch won't be able to touch you." "How can you be sure?" Pip asked, fearfully. "Lads, if I can't protect you, then I know a dozen others who can," Jon explained, a grim smile coming across his face. "I wasn't exactly having a day off in the south, you know? You think the king will protect 5 traitors?" Ed scoffed. "Or Lord Stark." "If they can't, then there's always the king's company," Jon said. "Who?" Gren asked. "It's a group of warriors, adventurers, sellswords. Anyone who needs a place to go," Jon explained. "Adventure, good food, pay. You'll be making a difference as well." Thoros' group sounded far more appealing than whatever punishment they would receive here, or even spending the rest of their lives on the run from the Night's Watch. Jon couldn't blame them. The weight of leaving the Watch had followed him for a few days, battling with his desire to save his father and be with Robb. But after he passed the Neck and spent time in the south after the war, he understood why more people lived down there than in the north. "What do you say?" Jon asked. "Will you help me?" Gren, who Jon already knew was with him, nodded firmly. Ed shrugged and nodded, clearly fine with the offer. Pipe nodded as well, although he still looked fearful. Toad glanced at Stony, waiting for the 5th member of the group to decide. Stony gazed at Jon for a long moment, before nodding slowly. "I'm with you," he rumbled. That was enough for Toad. He nodded in agreement as well. Jon now had his group. Flashback. "We're ready," Pipe whispered as he walked by, his large ears tucked under his hood. Jon nodded and glanced at the massive man next to him. Halder, more commonly known as Stony, was an incredibly strong man who had been named to the builders almost as soon as he reached the wall. Gren, Ed, Pipe, and Toad took up the rest of the room. The last 3 and Jon would keep a lookout while Gren and Stony opened the 3 gates under the wall. "Right, lads, let's get to it," Jon grunted, stepping away from the winch and towards the door, while the 2 large men set to work. The grinding of half-frozen gears and the rumbling sound of the massive gate rising sounded like a bear's ear-shattering roar to Jon, but they had planned their moment very carefully. It was nearly 3 in the morning, and it was still 2 hours until the night sentries would be relieved and allowed to find their warm beds. All of Jon's compatriots had assured him that no one would hear a thing. Each man had earned Thorn's ire at some point in time, and was forced to take a night shift as punishment. They knew as well as anyone that the sentries were most likely dozing off, only kept upright by the spears they held. "That's 1 done," Ed said from next to Jon, glancing over his shoulder. "2 more to go, boys." Gren and Stony set to work on the 2nd gate, finding their rhythm in moments. When the 2nd gate was nearly up, Jon held up his hand, its meaning repeated to the 2 men. "Stop," Pipe whispered quickly. The 2 men gritted their teeth as they held the gate aloft, stuck between the ground and the brackets that held them. The gate was a thick wall of oak and iron, several feet high and several inches thick. That's why it took 2 normal men to lift each gate. But Stony was one of the strongest men in Castle Black, and he was proving it now as he and Gren held the gate aloft. Jon watched as the watchman huddled around the fire, warming his hands. He never glanced towards the room where Jon and his companions worked, too lost in his boredom and longing for his bed. "Keep going," Jon ordered, glancing behind him. Gren nodded, and the 2 men began heaving on the levers, muttering curses, as they spent their strength slowly lifting the gate inch by inch upwards. Soon, the second gate had been lifted as well. "Almost there," Jon muttered, his hand hovering near the hilt of his blade. "If this works, you owe us at least a week's worth of ale," Ed grunted quietly, a grim smile on his face. "You'll have it," Jon promised. "I'll make sure you're all drunk for a month, if we get this done." "I'll hold you to that," Ed replied. The 2 men kept watch over the walkway for a few moments longer, until they heard the satisfying clunk of the 3rd gate setting into place. As soon as it was set, Jon drew his sword and turned towards the others as they armed themselves. Pipa had a spear, Toot and Ed both had swords. Gren scooped up a double-bladed axe, while Stony retrieved a large stone mallet from a loop on his belt. "Right, let's finish this." Jon sighed, leaving the room and making his way down into the courtyard, the 5 brothers behind him. By the time the 6 men reached the tunnel's entrance, it was clear that their work had not gone as unnoticed as they had hoped. Saffrelazar, accompanied by half a dozen men, was striding towards them. Janos Slint, with a smug look on his face, walked by his side. It didn't take a smart man to know that it had been Slint who had woken the Lord Commander. "What is the meaning of this?" Saffrelazar roared, gripping his sword. "Septon, Alisar, the free folk must be let through the wall," Jon replied firmly. "You refuse to act, so I have done it for you. For all of us. You have no right to act." Ser Alisar hissed, stopping just a foot away from Jon. He snarled at the 5 men behind Jon. "This is treason. You will all be tried, and I will see you punished." "These men are under my protection," Jon said, closing the gap between him and Thorn. "You will not touch them." Saffrelazar roared and drew his sword. Stepping back as he did, Jon raised his weapon, holding out his hand to stop the men behind him. "Stay back," he ordered, not wanting the men to kill their former brothers after already betraying them. "Sarah's is mine." The old knight wasted no time in launching himself at Jon, his sword cleaving through the air at him. The 2 men met in a screech of blades as their deadly dance began, trading blows as they turned in a circle. Saffrelazar was a good fighter, strong and sure with his strikes, but Jon, as many others have noticed, was nearly natural with a blade. Exceptionally fast, surprisingly strong, and with experience that came from many battles. Jon forced Saffrelazar back, his sword flashing in the torchlight as he took over the fight. The older knight grimaced and tried to regain the offensive for himself, but every attempt was broken within a few strikes from Jon. The older man wasn't bad, but he was outmatched. Out of the corner of his eye, Jon noticed Janos slinking around him, a hand within the folds of his cloak. Jon disengaged from Saffrelazar and slashed at Slint's midsection, causing the man to stumble backward, his dagger falling from his hand. Suddenly Jon and Saffrelazar were pulled back as multiple sets of hands grabbed them. Saffrelazar fought against them, all manner of curses spewing from his mouth as Jon allowed himself to be dragged away from the fight. "Stop this madness," Father bellowed, stepping forward. He was backed by Eddard Stark and a dozen Stark guardsmen, all with their weapons drawn. Ghost was at his side, snarling at Saffrelazar. As soon as Jon was released, he swiftly made his way back over to his companions. Saffrelazar held his ground in front of Father, his sword having been wrestled from his hand before he had been let go. "Your son opened the gates," Saffrelazar snapped, anger burning through his being. He said these turncloaks are now under his protection. "Then they are under mine as well," Father said heavily, not looking at Jon. "Jon is not only my son, but my bannerman. Any man under his protection is also that of the Lord Paramount of the North. Eddard Stark, the honorable Lord of Winterfell, protects treasonous curs." Saffrelazar snarled. "How fitting." Eddard Stark started forward, but a firm hand from Father held him back. "No, Eddard," Father said, his voice ominously calm. "Saffrelazar, that is 3 times you've sullied my name, in my presence. I will stand for it no longer." "What will you do?" Ser Olisar challenged as the sound of footsteps grew closer and closer. Eddard, collect the rest of our men and get them out here, Father ordered, keeping his gaze on Ser Olisar. We'll stay right here until all the free folk are through the wall. After that, we're returning to Winterfell. Father finally looked at Jon. You and your companions shall return to Long Lake and wait till you have word from me. Jon sheathed his weapon and nodded. Yes, Father. Father looked back at Septas. The Night's Watch shall receive no help from myself or any Lord of the North until you, Olisar Thorne, are no longer Lord Commander. This is madness, Ser Olisar bellowed. You swore to— I swore to nothing, Father roared, his eyes blazing with fury. Jon had never seen his father so angry, and he wished he never saw it again. To him, there was no sight scarier than a calm man losing himself to anger, especially a man such as his father. I came here to find a peaceful resolution so that we could be ready to fight the others, the men of Westeros, the Night's Watch, and the Free Folk, but you and your pig-headed pride gave us no other choice. Ser Olisar looked ready to murder Father, but the men of Winterfell stepped closer to their lord, ready to defend him at a moment's notice. This didn't have to happen, Thorne, Mance said, adding his voice as he emerged from the tunnel. Behind him, a line of hardened, weary faces went further than the eye could see. Flanking the king beyond the wall were 4 warriors. Jon recognized Tormund, the earless Magnar of the Thenns, Rattleshirt, and a sour-faced burly woman. Mance's wife Dalla was at his side, accompanied by a beautiful blonde woman whom Jon didn't recognize. Mance saw. Ser Olisar growled, a hand unconsciously drifting towards the empty scabbard at his side. Lads, go open the gate, Jon ordered, looking over his shoulder at his companions. Mance heard the order and nodded to Jon and his father before following the 5 former brothers. A few of the Black brothers who had accompanied Ser Olisar moved forward to stop the wildlings, but Eddard Stark and a few men cut them off. It was becoming painfully apparent that Olisar and his supporters were very outnumbered. This isn't over, Sept and Olisar promised, glaring at Jon and his father. No, it's just begun, Father replied, returning the glare. Daenerys Targaryen, my lady, the king requests your presence, Cerebar asked politely, coming up from behind Daenerys.
Very well, Daenerys said, knowing that the meeting was going to happen eventually.
The ship was halfway across the Vale and was making great time towards the wall. Daenerys knew that she wasn't going to make it to the wall without Robb questioning her at some point along the way. He had allowed her to join his voyage, but he had only postponed his interrogation of her. Serpa Caniston, Daenerys said, gesturing for her protector to follow. He's requested that you come alone, Cerebar said, keeping his gaze on Daenerys. Very well, Daenerys said again slowly, following the Vale Knight across the deck and under the stern, where the 3 cabins were located. Robb's door was at the very end of the short hallway. After a quick knock and an equally quick come-in, Cerebar opened the door and ushered Daenerys inside. Brienne sat across from the door, her sword laid on her lap with her hand resting on the hilt. There was barely enough room for Daenerys to stand up, so she could imagine how much trouble the tall warrior woman would have if a fight broke out in such a confined space. Sir Garth, the other king's guard, sat next to the king, his helm tucked under one arm as the 2 men played a game of Sivas. Daenerys was very familiar with the game, though she had never played herself. It was a complex game of strategy that included 10 pieces: rabble, spearman, crossbowman, light and heavy horse, trebuchet, catapult, dragon, elephant, and the king. Each piece could destroy or equally be destroyed by other pieces. The trebuchet and catapult, for instance, could kill the dragon, a piece that could kill the other 8 pieces on the board. The ultimate goal of the game was to kill your opponent's king. It was a game that Daenerys did not doubt that Robb Stark was good, if not great, at. The young wolf had rapidly risen through the ranks of renowned strategists during the War of the 5 Kings. In a game of strategy, it was not hard to guess who would win, the man who faced down Tywin Lannister or the knight who killed his men. Daenerys, Robb said kindly, gesturing to the open third seat between the 2 men. Please, sit. Would you like some wine? No, thank you, my lord, Daenerys said, accepting the invitation to sit. What would you like to discuss? Robb glanced at her before making his move on the board. The king took his light horse and attacked Sargard's crossbowmen. Daenerys usually saw most players defend such a piece with spearmen to protect them from cavalry attacks, but she assumed that Robb had destroyed that piece with an earlier turn. "You're heading north to see my father," Robb said finally. Looking up from the game, "I would like to know why." "I answered your question already," Daenerys countered respectfully. "That is my business." Robb shook his head as Seagard took out his catapult with his heavy horse, but in doing so, the knight managed to trap his cavalry against a mountain tile. Robb quickly took advantage and moved his spearmen forward, avenging his loss and adding to the growing pile of defeated pieces he had taken from his sworn sword. "So you did, but your answer did not satisfy me," Robb said, this time not looking up as the two men analyzed the board. "You said that it had to do with the long night. Thus, this conversation you want to have will also include me."
Daenerys huffed. "I don't see."
"I do," Robb said firmly, gazing at her. His tone left no room for debate. "Now please, the answer." Daenerys crossed her arms, annoyed that Robb had cornered her. She knew that she had no choice but to answer him. If he wanted, he could simply order her to tell him, but he had not reached that point yet. "It's a long story," Daenerys said, trying to find a way out of the conversation. "I have time," Robb answered immediately, positioning his cavalry pieces so that he could eliminate Seagard's trebuchet and catapult. "Ever since our conflict, my dragons have not been," Daenerys said, choosing her words carefully. "Normal." "Normal?" Robb asked, glancing at her. "They're dragons, my lady. They're not exactly normal to begin with." Daenerys frowned. "Depressed, my lord," she nearly snapped. "No doubt because of the loss of their brother." Robb nodded slowly. "Go on." "I believe that Rhaegal was depressed for another reason," Daenerys continued. "I believe that there was another potential dragon rider at the battle, and Rhaegal knew it too. Hence why he wouldn't fly to the east," Robb said. "Exactly," Daenerys said. "When your father visited me after the battle, we spoke about the role my brother played in the rebellion, and he also told me the truth of his crimes against your aunt." Robb didn't respond, his hand simply hovering over the dragon tile. He had managed to outmaneuver his Kingsguard, taking out his crossbowmen, spearmen, trebuchet, and catapult. Now all Robb had to do was move his trebuchet forward to take out Seagard's dragon before moving forward to take out the king. He admitted that the two had a child together, one born of rape, Daenerys said, forcing out the last word. "That child is half Targaryen, and should be riding Rhaegal when the others attack the wall." "The Green Man confirmed this?" Robb asked, snatching up Seagard's dragon after slaying it with his trebuchet. All the knight had left were a few pieces, but none that could stop the dragon. Robb's own king was now protected by spearmen, his elephants, and both his cavalry tokens. "He did," Daenerys said. "I need to know the identity of this child so that we can return to Dragonstone and begin training." "And what if they refuse your offer?" Robb asked curiously as Seagard cleared the board after Robb's victory. "The child, I mean, what if you bring this option before them and they refuse?" "Refuse?" Daenerys replied. "Why would they? To be a part of a noble house? To ride a dragon? These are fantasies that men dream of. Fantasies that I can turn into a reality." "Yes, but think about what you just said, Daenerys," Robb said. "Your brother forced himself on my aunt. Your father's crimes are well documented. Your former betrothed's right-hand man ordered the assassination of a child. These are all things that have happened in the past 2 decades. Put yourself in their place. How would you feel? Connecting yourself to a house with that sort of past." Daenerys opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She never really thought of it like that, just like when she arrived in Westeros. She simply assumed that others would flock to her banner, rejoicing in the fact that the dragons had returned to the throne. She never thought for a second that anyone would refuse her. "I will let you speak to my father," Robb continued. "If he decides to tell you the identity of this child, then so be it. But I wanted to warn you of what the outcome may be." "You speak as if you already know his answer," Daenerys said. "Do you know the identity of the child?" "I do," Robb said simply, "but I will not be the one to tell you. That is not my place." "But you know what is at stake," Daenerys said. 2 dragons, with 2 riders, could drastically change the outcome of the long night. The Grand Maester and the Green Man both said this. "I have no doubt they did," Robb answered calmly, "but I will not reveal what I know. It is not my place. I have sworn to keep it a secret, and that secret may only be shared by my father. Daenerys shook her head. Fine, she said bitterly. Daenerys, Robb said, with surprising gentleness. I understand. I truly do. Having 2 dragons would give us an edge that not even the first men had. But this is not me answering you as the king. This is me answering as a Stark. Daenerys saw his rationale. As a king and a commander, Robb knew all too well what an advantage 2 dragons would give him and his men. Mobile weapons that spew fire and are capable of destroying dozens of enemies in moments. Not even the greatest inventor could rival them, but as a Stark, he was honor-bound to keep his father's secret. I cannot force you to tell me, Daenerys said. You are right. This is not your secret to share, despite my desires. Thank you, Robb said. May I ask you one question? Daenerys asked. Robb nodded as he and Seagard set up for another game. Please. What do you think Robert would have done if he had known about the child? Daenerys asked. That is a good question. Robb mused as he strategically placed his pieces and tokens. There are a few things that could have happened. He could have tried to kill the child, bringing the might of the Westerlands and Stormlands down on the north. Of course, my father would have fought tooth and nail to defend them. Against his best friend? Daenerys asked. The 2 were like brothers, I heard. They were, Robb agreed. But the Starks had been whittled down by 3 during the rebellion. Blood is thicker than any bond, especially to the Starks. Could the North have prevailed against 2 realms? Daenerys asked. I'm not sure, Robb grunted as the board was revealed. Moat Cailin is practically impregnable. The neck is a hazard for even the most commanding leaders, even one of Tywin Lannister's capabilities. The North may not have the fighting spirit the levies of the Stormlands fight with, nor the gold of the Westerlands, but you will not find a tougher band of warriors than those from the North. They live their lives battling the elements, digging and scratching to build a life for themselves and their families. When worst comes to worst, I will always take a few good Northerners into a fight if given the chance. That is quite the proclamation, Daenerys said, slightly surprised. In the presence of 3 fine warriors, the king backed his homeland and his people. There's a reason the North has never been taken, my lady, Robb pointed as he analyzed the game before him. Now, the other possibility is that Robert accepted the child as Lyanna's and let the matter settle. Both Seagard and Robb scoffed and chuckled at the statement. Daenerys looked at both knights curiously. Does that amuse you, sirs? Forgive us, my lady. Seagard apologized. I and my brother knew Robert Baratheon well enough to know his manner of thinking. Not that he kept his thinking to himself, Robb added. He was a man of passion, who followed his emotions like a drunkard to drink. Seagard explained, he would have accepted this child as Lyanna's. That much is true, but I would wager that he would still strike the poor thing down simply because it is dragon spawn. Is that true? Daenerys asked, looking at Robb. Would he truly kill the child? Robb shook his head. I'm not sure. All I know is that he was a man who had lost himself to grief. He ate everything he could see, bedded any woman he could get his hands on. He was no longer the demon of the trident. That man had long since died. Grief is a drug that is not easily kicked, Brienne said quietly, speaking for the first time. It turns men into puppets, slaves of their own body. It turns the mind to mud and the spirit to a waterfall, spilling out of our very being. Well said, Robb said, nodding to his commander. Now, why did you ask, my lady? Simple curiosity, I suppose, Daenerys answered. I had no doubt of what he would do to me or my brother if he ever caught us. Not that he ever could, since the spider was protecting you in the first place, Robb pointed out, but it seems, oddly, that my father and Varys had the same idea. To protect the last of House Targaryen, Daenerys asked. Robb pursed his lips before shaking his head. To protect those they care about. That was a strange thought for Daenerys to wrap her mind around. Varys was not the first person she thought of when she heard the word care. The eunuch was the epitome of mystery. Daenerys doubted every word that came from his slight amused mouth, until he proved them right. For Lord Stark, that statement could be correct. Daenerys countered, I would not be so quick to place the spider on the same saddle. Robb tilted his head, then nodded, and amended his previous statements. To protect the future then. For whatever reason, that is still a strange concept to understand, Daenerys admitted. When speaking of Varys, I mean... The truth is strange, my lady, Robb said. For a young woman who had raised 3 dragons, Daenerys could only nod. The truth was indeed strange. Howland Reed. Howland found his daughter in the training ground, slamming arrow after arrow into the target 30 feet away. There was a stiffness to her form, but that little to affect her accuracy as each of her arrows either hit dead center or were closer enough to count. Her green eyes were hardened with an expression that wasn't hard for Howland to understand. It was sadness tinged with anger. She still wore her jerkin sewn with bronze scales, but now she wore a dark brown cloak that was pushed back from her shoulders, giving her more range of movement and the ability to reach over her shoulder and select another arrow from the quiver on her back. Howland watched her silently until she ran out of arrows. When she reached back and found that she had emptied her quiver, she stamped across the snow and began to retrieve her arrows, pulling them from the frost-hardened hay and sliding them home. Before she moved back to her firing position, she sighed and looked over at where he was standing under the balcony, garbed in his dark green cloak and hiding in the shadows.
How long? She asked.
Not long, Howland replied. Who taught you? Osha, Lord Rickon's sworn sword, Mira said. Not much to do around here. Howland nodded slowly. You're good. Thanks, Mira replied, gazing at her father before a slight smile came across her face, and she strode towards him, immediately brought him by his warm embrace. Howland sighed in relief, thankful to have one of his children back with him again. When he had heard of Winterfell being taken by the Ironborn, then burned by the Boltons, he was worried. Any father would have been, but he trusted that Jojen had fate on his side, and that Mira's training would see them through whatever dangers they do face. Howland was a man of practicality and faith. Together, his children possessed both. Father, Mira said, pulling back. I have to tell you about... Howland was already shaking his head. I know, child, he said softly, pulling her back in. Bran told me everything. I never saw, I knew, but I just didn't think... Mira tried to explain, her voice slightly muffled by her father's cloak, but Howland continued to reassure her. It's okay, Mira, Howland said gently. Jochen knew what his fate was before he ever left Greywater. He faced it with courage and defended his family. There is no better, more honorable way to go to the gods. I tried, father, Mira said, her voice cracking as she tried to hold back tears. I tried hard to keep him safe. Both of them. Death waits for no one, my dear. Howland sighed, pulling his daughter back and gently cupping her face in his hands, his green eyes gazing into her red-rimmed ones. We loved Jojen fiercely and protected him as much as we could, but we are no match for fate. Do not punish yourself. Mira sniffed. Then why do I feel guilty? He died protecting me, father. Because you feel as if you can't repay him, Howland explained. I have felt the same as you, and because they're gone, we feel as if we still owe a debt we can no longer repay. What do you mean? Mira asked before her eyes widened. The night of the laughing tree. Howland nodded sadly. Lady Lyanna saved me, a man she hardly knew, from 3 vicious boys. She even took it upon herself to punish the masters of those squires in the joust, demanding after her victory that they do better. There's not a day that goes where I wish that I had taken some chance, some moment to repay her kindness. She had saved my life, and before I could do anything, I was in Doran, standing in the room as Ned held her hand and the life left her body. Howland looked away from his daughter as painful memories assaulted his mind. He did not know Lyanna Stark as well as he would have liked, but even in the short time he spent with her at Harrenhal, he liked to think that they had become friends. After she had saved his life, he made a vow to himself that, whenever she needed him, he would be there for her. It was a vow that Howland had never had the chance to keep. I am sorry for all that life has put you through, child, and hopefully the gods will allow you some happiness, Howland said, looking back at his daughter. Mira nodded. I just want to go home, but I can't yet. The 3-eyed crow? Howland said, already knowing the answer. I swore to keep him safe, Mira said. I couldn't. I have to. Howland nodded. I know.
Will you return to Greywater?
Mira asked. Howland shook his head. No, I will remain here for now. But Mother will understand if I choose to remain with my daughter, and ensure that at least one of her children returns to her. Howland said firmly, now go find your bed. Tomorrow we'll see how good you are with your spear. If you mean to protect the 3-eyed crow, then you best be prepared to defeat any who wish to clip his wings. Sandor Clegane. The North hadn't changed at all since Sandor had traveled to Winterfell with the Fat King and the Royal Prick. The journey from King's Landing to the North had taken far more time because that blonde bitch of a queen had insisted on traveling in a lavish wheelhouse that slowed down the entire company. The Fat King had raged about it for days. His desire to reach his best friend and get as far away from his family was as clear as day. The little bird had decided against a wheelhouse, although her betrothed had offered her exactly that. Instead, she donned riding clothes like her protectors and rode side by side with Lord Arryn the entire journey. It had surprised Sandor when the girl had first emerged from the keep, but he had since learned that the little bird had more wolf in her than others realized. From Sandor's perspective, she had learned just as much from Cersei as she had from her own mother and Septa. She treated everyone, from the lowliest servant to the highest lord, with respect and kindness, almost as if they were old friends. She was quickly learning servants' names and calling them by such. She was also highly observant and picked up on more than others realized. She was still learning the game of politics that ruled her world, but she was by no means a novice to the game. Sandor now stood outside the door of Lord Stark's solar, as mother and daughter caught up. "You're the Hound," a voice said from in front of him. Sandor slowly lowered his gaze until it fell on a slim, dark-haired girl. Her chin was tilted upwards slightly, and there was a defiant and angry look in her eye. She wore boy clothes and carried a slim, rapier-like sword at her side. "Arya Stark," he rumbled. "Hound." Arya Stark responded fiercely. "What do you want?" Sandor asked. "You killed Micah," Arya snapped. Sandor frowned. He didn't remember killing anyone with that name, but then again he killed a lot of people. Whoever this Micah was, he meant a lot to the girl. He shrugged and glared at her. "So?" he challenged. "You killed an innocent boy. A boy too weak to fight back." Arya seethed. A memory suddenly came to Sandor's mind as Arya spoke. He remembered now it was some peasant boy that Arya had befriended. After Joffrey had been savaged by the girl's wolf, he had ordered Sandor to track down the boy, since he couldn't lay a finger on the Stark girl, and her wolf had gone missing. "I did as I was ordered," Sandor said simply, without any remorse for his previous actions. He had been a monster who had worked for a monster. Now he was a monster who worked for Little Bird. "You were told to kill a boy, and you obeyed." Arya snarled, a hand resting on her sword. "I'm the Hound girl," Sandor barked. "I do as I'm told. Joffrey was a prick and deserved to die 1,000 times over, but he was my master and I was his dog to unleash as he saw fit." "You're no man," Arya spat. "No," Sandor agreed grimly. "I'm a killer girl. It's what the fucking gods put me on this shit-filled land to do, and I do it well." "What's going on out here?" the little bird asked, opening the door. She didn't look all that surprised to see her little sister arguing with Sandor. "Arya, has something happened?" "You're protecting a murderer," Arya replied angrily, crossing her arms. "Sandor," the little bird asked before she made the same connection he did. "The Ruby Ford. He killed Mike Heir," Arya spat again, glaring at her sister now. "Arya, Joffrey ordered him to do it," the little bird explained. "He had no choice." "He had a choice," Arya argued. "Everyone has a choice." The little bird shook her head. "Arya, please." "He killed a boy," Arya shouted. "Arya," Lady Stark scolded, joining her older daughter in the doorway. "Arya, let it go," the little bird ordered. "He had no choice." She looked at him. "If Joffrey had not ordered you to kill him, would you have done so?" Sandor shook his head. "No, my lady." The little bird looked back at her sister. "Arya, please understand that Sandor is a good man who's just misunderstood," she said. "You make his death is not on him, but Joffrey." Arya glared between him and her sister before storming off. The little bird watched her go, looking a little sad. She sighed and shook her head, glancing at her mother who wore the same sad, exasperated look. "I'll speak to her tonight," the little bird promised, before turning towards Sandor. "Clegane, I would have your opinion on something." Sandor raised an eyebrow, but nodded and sheathed his sword before following the two Stark women into the room. Lord Stark's solar was impressive. Not too large, but not too small either. Most of the room had bookshelves overflowing with books and scrolls. To one side hung a massive map of the north, showing every castle, village, town, road, and trail throughout the vast region. On the other side was a small side table that held a half-empty pitcher of watered-down wine, and the remains of lemon cakes. The desk dominated the center of the room, a massive creation made from solid oak that sat on 4 thick legs. 3 chairs had been placed around the desk, 1 on one side, 2 on the other. On the desk, messages and reports were neatly stacked and organized, no doubt Lady Stark's handiwork, but those had all been pushed to the side as a map had been spread out across the surface, its corners held down by a candle holder, 2 cups, and another pitcher.
Besides, Lord Harold, you are the most experienced warrior we have, Lady Stark said, taking her place behind the desk as Sandor stood next to his charge. This map here is all we know of beyond the wall. Sandor grunted and looked down at the map, placing one metal-covered hand on the desk to lean on. The map was shit. That much was clear. The wall and all its bloody castles looked to have been drawn with a sure hand. There was nothing of use after that. Forests, mountains, and rivers. That's all the mapmaker had been able to find out about the lands beyond the wall. There was one settlement beyond the wall, a place called Hardhome. Who drew this? Sandor asked, looking up at the 2 women. We borrowed it from Lord Serwyn, Lady Stark answered. He was the closest lord. Everything in the library had been burned. Sandor nodded, remembering what the Bolton bastard had done. The map is horrible, Sandor said bluntly, leaving his normal amount of cursing. Besides, you don't need it. Why do you say that? The little bird asked. Where will the battle be fought? Sandor asked. The wall, the little bird answered after a moment. Sandor nodded, gesturing to the rest of the map. None of this is useful then, if all that is important is this, he said, jabbing his finger into where Castle Black was drawn. If what your uncle says is true, then we will fight a defensive battle. How do you know this? Lady Stark asked. Sandor resisted the urge to growl. He knew this because war and killing were his living. All these ladies knew about war and combat were the pretty lies told to them in stories. Limitations put your back to the wall, Sandor grunted finally. The enemy has more men you dig in and defend. The opposing commander is a better strategist. You give him fewer ways to attack you. What if we need to know about the lands beyond the wall? The little bird asked. Sandor shrugged, crossing his arms. Either the Night's Watch or the savages crossing the wall will tell us all we need to know, he answered, before pointing at the wall. This bloody thing is all that matters. Thank you for your honesty, Clegane, the little bird said softly. This is not a conversation you two should be having, my lady, Sandor grunted. Forgive me, my ladies, but neither of you are commanders nor have you ever stepped foot on the battlefield. The little bird made a futile gesture with her hand. We just thought that maybe a fresh set of eyes would help. Sandor shook his head. That's not how this works. Fresh eyes help when reading a book. You need experienced eyes when looking over a battlefield. Yours won't help. That's a little harsh, Lady Stark muttered. It's the truth, Sandor replied, jabbing his finger at the map. Focus on the home, my ladies. Leave strategy to men like the king, and leave the killing to men like me, Jon Stark. As soon as Jon ducked into the tent, he knew that he was in for a long, one-sided discussion with his father. The Lord of Winterfell was standing around a roughly made table with Manson as captains, but their discussion came to a stop when Jon entered. Manson Tormund nodded respectfully towards Jon while the other 3 just gave him cold looks. Gentlemen, Harma, give us a moment, Father said. The 5 wildlings began to file out of the room. Mance was the last to leave. But before he did, he put a hand on Jon's shoulder, looked him in the eye and nodded. Jon believed he knew what the former watchman was thinking. He nodded back and the king beyond the wall followed his friends out of the tent. Father, Jon said as soon as they were alone, but his father put a hand up to stop him. No, Jon, he said, his voice heavy with a mixture of emotion. You put me and our family. Father. Jon tried again, but was silenced with a look. I did not want to make those men traitors, Father continued, but they became so when they helped you open the gates. Jon could only nod, waiting for the lecture to come to an end, so that he could return to Long Lake and begin preparing any fighting men he could. It also helped, since he could get Gren and the others further from the wall and away from any vengeance Thorne might send after them. I'm proud of what you did, Father said, making Jon's head snap up. What? Jon asked. I understand your confusion, Father said, crossing his arms. But at the end of the day, someone had to dirty their cloak for real change to come about. You were able to accomplish what I could never do.
That is real courage, Jon. Putting aside your integrity to help others. Thank you, Father, Jon said, stunned with the sudden turn in the conversation. Does this mean you're not angry? I was at first, Father admitted, but I realized that I was just worried. Honor is a heavy chain to wear, and I have worn it for so long that it keeps me from doing what must be done. You've shown that, when the need arises, you can take it off and still remain a good man. Jon nodded. Will you stay here? For a time, Father answered. I wish to know more about the king beyond the wall, and I believe he wishes to know more about me as well. I also have no wish to leave the free folk to Thorne's vengeance. What do you mean? Jon asked. Thorne has long been a bitter man, Jon. He despises me and Robert for sending him to the wall. After a while, men like that can snap, Father explained. With the Watch's new manpower and resources, I fear that he may use those to his advantage and attack the free folk. I see, Jon said. You believe that if you're here, he won't attack.
I'm unsure, Jon, Father said.
As I said, men like Thorne can snap, and when they do, they're unpredictable. I hope that my presence here will keep him at bay. Do you still wish for me to return to Long Lake? No, I wish for you to return to Winterfell, Father said. I'm sure Benjen has arrived by now and shown the Northern Lords the white he carries. I'd rather have you there to organize the war effort than Cat. Jon nodded. Of course. Where are the 5 men who were with you? Father asked, once again changing the subject. I've sent them to find shelter at Queen's Crown, Jon said. I planned on retrieving them before I went back south. Do so and ride for Winterfell. Father nodded. I will ride back when I can, but I fear that I must remain here to keep the peace, as thin as it is. Do you truly mean to keep your word? Jon asked. Will you leave the Watch to its own devices if the others attack and Sarah Leeser is still Lord Commander? No, I will not. Father sighed. But I have had enough of the damned man. Without his arrogance, he wouldn't have lost 5 men, nor crushed relations with the North. Will the Watch name a new Lord Commander? Jon asked. Can they? I'm not sure, Father answered, but anyone would be better than Thorne. Jon nodded slowly. His father was an agreeable man most of the time, even with those he didn't trust or didn't like, but Thorne had well and truly destroyed all his bridges. Not a smart move when there was the end of the world bearing down on his castle, and he needed every ally he could get. What were you talking to Mance about? Jon asked. He's currently settling his people among the Gift and New Gift, Father answered, grabbing a nearby map and spreading it out over the table. His captains will each take a section and keep the peace in the name of the Westerosi Free Folk Alliance. You haven't named them citizens of the realm? Jon asked curiously. The Free Folk are very different from the people of Westeros, Father answered. I'm sure you've noticed the same. To name them true citizens of Westeros, they would have to agree to the laws of the land, which many do not. When they lived beyond the wall, they enjoyed a freedom that is uncommon for a common Westerosi. So, as of now, it's simply easier to leave them to Mance to govern as he sees fit. We'll deal with the matter later. If we live long enough for that to happen, Jon said grimly. Aye, Father agreed. There's that to consider. Where have you settled the giants? Jon asked curiously, looking at his father. Father smiled slightly. I have given them their own land to the southeast of Queen's Crown in the mountains. There are a few who remained with the free folk. What of the mountain clans? Jon asked. There are no clans where I have put them. I've made sure of that, Father answered. I also sent a rider to Hugo Wall telling him to warn the other clans to steer clear of the area. I'll pass by Last Hearth on my way south. The great Jon deserved to know about his new neighbors, Jon said. Good idea, Father said. I told Mance that raiding would not be tolerated. How'd he take that? It helps that you were the one who let his people through, Father said. He says that he owes the Starks a debt, and keeping the peace will be his way of repaying it. It seems some good came from my little stunt, Jon grunted. I'll ride to Queen's Crown in the morning. May the gods be with you, Father replied, as father and son moved around the table to embrace. Same with you, Jon said. Gendry storm. These past 2 years had been a whirlwind for the young smith. After being cast out for reasons he still didn't know, Gendry traveled into the Riverlands with a Night's Watch recruiter before the group was attacked by Goldcloaks. As their prisoner, Gendry found himself taken to Harrenhal, where he was nearly killed before Lord Tywin saved his life, putting him back to work in the forge. Gendry fashioned swords and spears for the Westermen before the army was routed at High Heart. He then found himself working for Seprin Din Tully, the Blackfish. For whatever reason, the old knight seemed to take a liking to Gendry as he immediately put him under the apprenticeship of the best blacksmith in the Starks' war camp. The man was not as skilled as Master Mott, but he was still able to teach Gendry quite a bit. He traveled with the Starks back south to King's Landing, where he worked for the army until the young wolf defeated the Dragon Queen and her nephew. The army broke up in the following weeks, and Gendry had no clue where his path led. Thankfully, Septon Bryn stepped in once more and sent Gendry with Lord Bryce Caron south into the Stormlands, where Lord Caron dropped Gendry off at Storm's End. The Blackfish had asked the steward of the castle, Septon Tristaran Benrose, to take Gendry in as a favor. For the past year, Gendry had worked under the master smith in Storm's End, an oddly shaped hairy man by the name of Hoston. He had massive shoulders and heavily muscled arms, but his legs and hips looked almost comically thin compared to his broader upper half. Still, Hoston was extremely good at what he did, and like Master Mod, accepted nothing less than Gendry's absolute best work.
Gendry,
a Baratheon soldier said. Standing in the doorway of the forge, Master Hoston had traveled into the village to gather materials for an ornate pendant. One of Lord Baratheon's knights had asked for so that he could give it to his wife, leaving Gendry alone to work. Yes? Gendry asked, wiping his hands as he stepped away from his work. Lord Baratheon and Ser Courtenay have requested your presence in the Great Hall, the man said. Gendry nodded quickly. Of course, I'll be there soon. Just let me settle some things here. The soldier nodded and strode off. Gendry quickly extinguished the forge and picked up the workshop before washing his hands and face in a barrel of clean water. He set his leather apron on a peg by the door before walking towards the main keep, wondering why he had been summoned. Gendry never had much interaction with the soon-to-be Lord of Storm's End. Eddard Baratheon was a younger boy, a few years younger than Gendry himself, but the two had never spoken. Gendry had once forged a hunting dagger for the young lord's last name day, but that had been a request made by Ser Courtenay himself, so that the gift was kept a secret. Gendry, as always, kept his head down as he walked through the castle, keeping a respectful distance from any important-looking men and women who passed by him. A few of the soldiers who walked by nodded to him. They didn't mind Gendry, and he had endeared himself to them through his work fixing their armor or weapons. They didn't care about his name or status, only that his work kept them safe and dangerous in battle. He stopped before the great double doors that led into the hall. Gendry cleared his throat and glanced at the two men wearing golden tabards over shining silver mail, holding stout spears and kite shields bearing a black prancing stag. Lord Baratheon has summoned me, Gendry said awkwardly. The two guards glanced at each other before nodding and opening up the doors. Gendry took a moment to nod to them before descending the few steps into the massive room. Both sides of the hall had long tables hugging the walls, while the great stone pillars that supported the roof were decorated with banners bearing the black and gold colors of House Baratheon. Gendry, isn't it? A young, confident voice asked from the end of the hall. Sitting on a stone throne decorated with two charging stags on the armrests was Lord Eddard Baratheon. He was a handsome young man, with shoulder-length black hair and deep blue eyes. He had sturdy features for one so young, but it was clear that he was destined to be a large man when he grew older. The only thing that looked out of place on the boy was his oddly large ears. What Gendry noticed immediately is that the younger man looked like himself, the same dark jet-black hair and blue eyes. Gendry caught himself staring and quickly remembered his manners. He bowed deeply and folded his hands behind his back. You summoned me, my lord. When Gendry stood back up, he realized that Lord Eddard had a very curious look on his face. He glanced at Ser Courtenay, who flanked the throne, but the bald knight simply shook his head and gave the young lord a look before looking at Gendry. Thank you for coming, Gendry, but it wasn't Lord Baratheon who summoned you, he explained, looking past the young smith. Gendry frowned in confusion before turning to look at the entrance to the hall, where a new man was entering. He was tall and wore a strange green cloak, with elk antlers attached to the hood. In one hand he carried a long leather bag. Gendry recognized the metallic clink of weapons tapping together. This is the Green Man from the Isle of Faces, Ser Courtenay explained. He is the one who summoned you. The Isle of Faces? Gendry asked. That island by Harrenhal? You've been to the ruins? Lord Eddard asked. I have, Gendry answered. becoming hesitant. I was captured by the Lannisters after they slaughtered the group of Night's Watch recruits I was with. In exchange for my life, I worked in the forge. I left them as soon as I could, he added quickly. Lord Baratheon, Gendry, I am happy that you can both be present. The green man said, standing between the two young men. You both need to hear what I am about to say. Very well, Lord Baratheon said, leaning forward in his throne. You are the last surviving males of House Baratheon, the green man said bluntly, causing both Gendry and Lord Edric to react in a similar fashion. What? They both yelled. Gendry took a few steps back, while Edric shot to his feet. The green man gazed at Sir Courtenay, whose face was as red as his beard. You did not tell them, he asked simply. The old knight shook his head. Edric knew. Gendry, I wasn't sure, he said, looking at the smith. Sorry, lad, you already had a set path. I didn't want to muddy it up by telling you. Gendry shook his head. Wait, stop, he said, grabbing the back of his neck. I'm a Baratheon. You are Robert Baratheon's bastard son, Sir Courtenay said. By your age, I'd say you're his second oldest. What does that mean for me? Edric demanded. He is not legitimized, my lord, Sir Courtenay said, reassuring the younger Baratheon. He has no claim to Storm's End. Gendry wasn't sure what to do. He wanted to smash something, but at the same time, he wanted to simply sit on the floor and think about what had been said. Robert Baratheon, King Robert Baratheon, the man who caved in Rhaegar's chest on the trident and tore down the Targaryen Empire, was his father. I don't want it, Gendry muttered, shaking his head. What? Edric asked. I don't want Storm's End, Gendry repeated. I don't care about how old I am. I don't care who my father was. I'm just Gendry, a blacksmith. Edric looked at Sir Courtenay, who looked just as confused and shocked as his ward. The green man simply waited patiently as the three worked through what had been said. After a long moment, Edric approached Gendry and held out his hand. Slowly, Gendry returned the gesture and the two brothers clasped arms. You may want to be a blacksmith, Gendry, but you are still my brother, Edric said firmly. Gendry nodded. Aye, but fate has taken us this far, my lord. I don't think we should interfere with the paths we're set on. You've been a good lord and will only get better, I'm sure. If it's all the same to you, I'll stick to smithing. Edric smiled slightly. So long as you remain in Storm's End as our smith, that's fine with me, he said, reaching down with his free hand to unsheath the dagger at his side. He held it up. I and a dozen others can vouch for your work. The two brothers shook arms before turning to the green man. We're listening, Edric said. The long night comes again, brothers of Storm. The green man said, digging into the bag and retrieving one of the weapons from within. The two of you represent the two halves of Doran Godsgrief, the great warrior who led the people of the Stormlands against the others. The long night? Edric asked. That's a myth. Surely. No, it isn't, the green man said seriously. It comes again, as you will soon find out. You said we represent two halves of Doran Godsgrief, Gendry said. What do you mean? Doran was said to be a great leader who could inspire even the faintest heart, the green man explained. His great booming voice would echo across any battlefield, rallying every man and woman who could hear him. Eddard Stark was the visionary and Lansactorly was a brilliant strategist, but it was Doran who kept the army together against an enemy as terrifying as the others, and their horde of the undead. He nodded to Edric. You, Edric, have inherited this quality from your father Robert Baratheon. You're a natural leader and you will be instrumental in keeping the forces of Westeros together in the coming war. Edric squared his shoulders and nodded. I will, I promise. You, Gendry, have inherited Doran's strength and will, the green man said. There were very few men alive who could best the chieftain of Stormhall on the battlefield. His crushing blows scattered groups of wights in mere moments. He was a man who led from the front, and he carved through the ranks of the undead on numerous occasions. The green man pulled a battle axe from the bag, though it was unlike any weapon Gendry had ever seen before. Two great shards of black rock made up both axe heads, their edges honed to razor sharpness. Brackets made of bronze kept the black stone connected not only to each other, but to the shaft as well. The wood looked to be ash or some other strong wood, reinforced with more bronze that looked to have runes carved into it. The bottom third of the haft was wrapped in leather that looked well worn, but not cracked or brittle. This is the weapon of Durin God's grief, the green man said, tossing the battle axe to Gendry, who caught it. Immediately Gendry was surprised by how well balanced the weapon was. He expected the weapon to be overly heavy, or at least weighed more towards the head, but the weight was evenly distributed throughout the weapon. The smith held the weapon in his hand, thinking about the damage he could do with it. "What's this stone?" Edric asked, looking over the strange axe blades. "Dragonglass, my lord," the green man said. "The only weakness the others have besides Valyrian steel." Gendry looked down at the weapon in his hands, then over at his new brother. Edric looked to be stuck between being happy for Gendry and sad that he was not given the honor of wielding his ancestor's weapon. "Brother, if you will lead us north when the time comes, I swear on my life that I will allow no harm to come to you," Gendry promised, not sure where the words were coming from. On impulse he dropped to one knee, laying the weapon at Edric's feet. "If you are the voice of House Baratheon, and I, its sword arm, then it is I who should die before you." Edric helped Gendry to his feet, grabbing him by his shoulders when he was upright. "We are the last living male descendants of Durin God's grief," he said, paraphrasing what the green man had said. "We will both fight and die together if the gods will it." Gendry nodded. "We will fight together," he agreed. Edric smiled slightly. "You have swung a hammer for some time, Gendry. It's time you learned how to use a proper weapon." Janos Slint. Queen's Crown had been abandoned long ago. The wildland raids that had savaged their lands for years had driven off most of the inhabitants. Most of the village had either collapsed, in the process of collapsing, or been taken over by trees. The tower, its merlins colored gold in honor of Queen Alysanne, still stood on an island of its own, in the center of a lake. All in all, it was as good a hiding place as there was, since it was so far off the beaten path. Unfortunately for the 5 traitors, Septolezzer knew that there were only 2 places for the 5 men to hide. Mole's Town and here. It would have been stupid for the former brothers to go to Mole's Town. Not only was it too obvious a spot, but there was bound to be a watchman there illegally visiting the brothel. That left only Queen's Crown. As Janos stalked forward, he couldn't help but smile victoriously. He was once again in a place of power at Ser Olisar's side. All it took was snitching on Stark and his fellow traitors to the Lord Commander. And Janos had been welcomed back into his confidence, his cowardice at Craster's Keep forgiven and forgotten about. Now he would cement his place by the Lord Commander's side by killing the 5 traitors. Sullen strode forward into the light cast by the campfire. As the other 7 figures spread out around the sleeping group of men, they moved like shadows. None of them had drawn their weapons yet, but there was still more than enough time for that. Every man that Slint had had was an experienced warrior, and wouldn't shy away from their task. There was only one man on guard. He spotted Janos the moment he stepped into the dying firelight. "Who goes there?" the man demanded in a weak and terrified voice. It was the little one of the group with the stupidly large ears. Piped Slint remembered. The man carried a spear, but he was no fighter. Slint smirked arrogantly. "Put down the spear, boy," he ordered. "This will go a lot faster if you do." "What the hell's is going on?" Ed grumbled, as he sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. As soon as he caught sight of Slint, he grabbed his sword and rolled to his feet. He kicked the burly redhead next to him. "Get up, lads," he called, waking the others. "We got company." "Slint!" cursed quietly as the other 3 men woke up, arming themselves as soon as they saw Slint. The former commander of the Gold Cloaks made a gesture with his hand, and his 7 men now stepped into the light, drawing their weapons as they did. They were the remains of House Florent, sent to the wall by Robb Stark after the war. Most were knights, well trained with both sword and lance. Against scum like the 5 men in front of them, they were sure of victory. "Ser Olisar isn't very pleased with you lot," Slint sneered. "So he sent us to send you on your way a little faster."
He sent assassins.
The redhead Gren rumbled. "So much for being an honorable knight." Slint shrugged. "You broke the rules?" "We saved thousands of people," Ed argued. Janos smirked. "You call those savages people," he joked. "You're all wildling lovers, just like Ned Stark's bastard." "Fancy saying that to my face, Slane," a new voice barked from behind Janos. Janos turned slowly, only to find the tip of a sword at his throat. Janos Stark, his face clouded with fury, had managed to sneak up behind the group. He and his monstrous direwolf, The beast seemed to glare at Janos and his men as well, a fearsome growl reverberating from its throat. He had seen the beast around Castle Black, always fearful of the damage it could do if it attacked him. "Say it." Jon snarled, moving his sword forward until Janos felt a trickle of blood slide down his neck and under his collar. Thankfully, Janos' life was saved when one of the Florent men attacked, forcing the young lordling back with a series of fast, aggressive strikes. Jon immediately turned his attention away from Janos and onto his attacker. As the camp descended into fighting, Janos scurried away from the combat, seeking shelter behind a piece of ruined wall. The albino direwolf tackled one man who tried to stab it with a spear, ripping out his throat before the man could even cry for help. Another man had his head taken off by a savage strike from Gren, while the other massive-looking man, Stony, caved in a Florent's chest with a maul before squashing his head like a bloody melon. That left 3 Florents and Janos left. One of the Florents tried to attack Pipsy, the weakest of the group, but he was killed before he could reach the small man. A longsword had been shoved through his back courtesy of Jon Stark. The other 2 men were cut down almost as quickly. Ed and Toad drove their swords through one man while the second was mauled by the direwolf. "Come out, Slint!" Jon roared as the other 5 former watchmen surrounded him. Jon Stark. Thankfully, none of Jon's friends had been killed in the short, bloody battle. Gren nursed a cut on his cheek and arm, while Ed had a nasty cut just above his eye. Toad, Peep, and Stony looked unscathed. Thankfully, the front of Ghost's face and chest were stained red, but the mighty albino looked uninjured. Jon flicked the blood from Frost as he planted himself in front of the ruined section where Slint had taken cover from the fighting. "Come out, Slint," Jon roared, glaring at where the coward was hiding. Sarah Lazar's cowardly right hand slinked out of his hiding place, but immediately put his back to a wall as he drew his sword. Grin moved forward, his axe stained with blood and thirsty for more, but Jon put a hand up, stopping the larger man. Grin looked at Jon in surprise. He hadn't expected him to stop him from killing the coward. "What does Thorn have planned?" Jon asked, with surprising calmness. "He just wanted us to kill you," Janos whimpered. "Please let me go. I'm sorry." "Let me kill him, Jon," Gren growled, glaring at Slint. "I'll open him from brain to balls." Jon gazed at Janos Slint, trying to see if the man was lying or not. The man's body language didn't help. He was a fucking terrified, shaking mess of a man who looked close to both tears and shitting himself. Jon feinted a step towards him, and Slint immediately dropped his weapon and dropped to his knees, holding his hands up to ward off any attack.
You're truly fucking pathetic, Slint.
Ed spat in disgust. "Cowards usually are," Stony added. "Pick up your sword," Jon ordered. Janos looked up at the young lord in surprise, but Jon's face revealed nothing. Without breaking eye contact with Jon, Slint scrambled around until his hand found the hilt of his sword. "Stand up," Jon snapped. Guinea stumbled to his feet, still looking scared and confused. Jon let go of Gren. "Fight, but if he drops his sword again, let him pick it back up. We might as well try to beat some bravery into him before he goes." Jon explained. The redhead smiled fiercely and nodded. Jon turned towards Pete and held out his hand. "Spear." The smaller man immediately handed over his weapon, with it in hand. Jon turned back towards Janos. "You try to run and this will be coming after you," Jon threatened, reversing his grip on the weapon, "and if I miss, Ghost won't." Janos glanced between Gren, his axe, the spear in Jon's hand, and the massive direwolf with the red-stained snout. He gulped nervously and twisted his sword in his hand. It was clear that he knew that he was fucked anyway. "Begin!" Jon barked. Gren roared as he brought his axe down in a crushing overhead blow. Janos yelped and backed away, weakly trying to parry the larger weapon. Gren continued moving forward, sodding his axe in wide, shield-shattering attacks while Slant continued to stumble away, trying to put as much distance between himself and the swinging axe as possible. "Fight, Slant!" Jon roared. "Be a man for once in your pathetic life." Janos Slint seemed to take this hard as he gave a half-hearted battle cry and charged Gren. The larger man grinned, and as his opponent got closer, met his charge when he smashed the shaft of his axe into Slint's face. Slint reeled backward, dropping his sword and bringing both hands up to his face, as blood poured between his fingers. Everyone had heard his nose break, and they were anxious to see the damage done. Jon, using his sword, gently managed to pry Slint's hands away from his face. The man's nose was twisted in a gruesome angle, and blood seemed to pour endlessly from his nostrils. Tears slid freely down his cheeks, and mixed with the blood. "Pick up your sword," Jon ordered quietly. Slint shook his head, like a child, throwing a tantrum. "No," he shouted, defiantly, his voice thick from the blood in his throat. "You bastards are going to kill me anyway. Just do it." "Yes, we are," Jon nodded, planting the spear in the snow as he crouched down to Slint's level. Like a parent speaking to an unruly child, he spoke. "Are you unwilling to fight for your life, Lord Slint?" Janos Slint looked up at Jon with pure loathing in his eyes. "Fuck you, bastard." Jon sighed and stood up. "If nothing else, lads, we've plucked a leech from Ser Alizar's back. I'm not sure if this is a blessing for him or a curse for us. The Watch has had its fill of cowards," Gren grunted. "When the others come, we can't afford to have any more." Gren buried his axe in Slint's skull, watching as the light died in his eyes before placing a foot on the man's bloody face and pulling the blade free. Slint's limp body slumped away, his brains spreading out on the snow. "Now his watch has ended," Jon said grimly before turning to the others. He tossed the spear back to Plight. "We have a long ride to Winterfell. We need to start as soon as possible." "Winterfell?" Toad asked. "Why in the bloody hell are we going there?" "Because war is coming, you blockhead," Ed said, clipping his former brother behind his ear. "And Lord Stark here has a lot of work to do." "We have a lot of work to do," Jon corrected. "The sooner we start, then maybe we'll see each other in the end." Asha Greyjoy, the Lady of Pike, frowned as her ship pulled into the harbor at Seagard. Normally, a harbor like Seagard's would be filled with traders, either heading north from the Arbor and Lannisport to Eagle's Roost, or the other way around. Now that the fishers and riders had set up towns of their own on the western shore, much more trade was happening between the north and its neighbors to the south. In place of traders were several longships, many of which she could name on sight. There was Nightflyer, Lord Blacktide's ship. Lord Goodbrother's and Drum's ships were on the left and right of her. Further down, Asha spotted ships belonging to Lord Spire, Lord Saltcliffe, and Lord Orkwood. Standing on the stern of the final ship, one that Asha knew quite well, was her liege lord and uncle. Roderick Harlaw, standing on his ship, sea-song. "What in the blazes is your uncle doing here, Captain?" Corul asked curiously, coming to stand beside Asha.
He's not the only one.
Asha grunted. "There are at least half a dozen other ships that belong to Ironborn lords." "Wonder what drew them out," Corul wondered aloud. It was no secret that the people, especially the lords of the Iron Islands, became very reclusive after their humiliating string of defeats and eventual surrender to Robb Stark. First, the Targaryen hadn't been able to defeat a group of maesters, which ultimately led to the death of his men and himself when his force had been trapped within Old Town and slaughtered by Ser Fossoe's army. Then Asha surrendered Deepwood Moddard even though the battle was already over. The storming of Pike by Randall Tarley had been the nail in the coffin for the Ironborn. They had suffered immense losses and received nothing in return. As much as Asha hated to admit it, her father's former bannermen had gotten soft after the war, their heartache and empty war chests occupying their minds as her uncle slowly went about changing things. First, thralls had been returned to the mainland of Westeros, but that was more of Robb Stark's work than her uncle's. Then, whatever remained of the Iron Fleet had been dismantled and given over to lords in the north and Lord Mallister to help them build fleets of their own. In Mallister's case, the ships had gone to help rebuild the royal fleet. One of the first major changes her uncle made was turning Lordsport into a center of trade for Westeros. Although the city was far from the likes of Lansport or King's Landing, or even White Harbor for that matter, gold was trickling into the Iron Islands at an increasing rate. Asha knew what her uncle was trying to do. He was trying to show them that trading with our neighbors would prove to be more profitable than taking from them. Asha was sure that whenever the other lords came out of their depression, her uncle would be ready for them, his pockets overflowing with gold that he had earned through trade, not through the iron price. "We'll find out soon enough," Asha replied. "Nata, bring us alongside my uncle's ship." "Aye, Captain," came the reply from the sailor at the tiller, before he began calling orders to the rest of the crew. Asha had been forced to rebuild much of her crew, but she still had about half a dozen men who had survived Deepwood Moddard. Corul stood head and shoulders above the rest as her calm and steady right hand. "When we dock, take control here and make sure the ship is put to rights. Asha ordered, "I'll go ashore with my uncle and find out what's happened."
Aye, Captain,
Quarrel said firmly. Asha stayed on the bow of her ship as Nat brought the ship into port. There were a handful of dock workers who were ready and waiting for them, helping tie off the ship as soon as it was close enough. Standing nearby watching the Ironborn ship was a squadron of soldiers armed to the teeth and bearing the eagle of House Mollister. Asha, her uncle Roderick said, walking up the dock towards her. He wore no armor and didn't even seem to have a knife at his side. "Nuncle," Asha greeted, stepping from her ship to the dock and embracing the older man. "What's going on?" Roderick scowled. "I wish I had an answer for you, but I haven't the slightest clue," he admitted, obviously annoyed with being in the dark. "You saw the other ships?" "I did," Asha said. "How many are there?" "A lot more than I believed would come," Roderick said. "There's 10, counting yourself and me. Salcliffe, Orkwood, Good Brother, Blacktide, Spar, Drum, even Botley and Winch came." "How have they been treated?" Asha asked. Roderick looked over his shoulder at the soldiers. "Sir Patrick, Lord Mallister's heir and current ruler of Seagard, has called us his guests, which means that he hasn't thrown any in the dungeons yet, but our every move is being watched at all times," Asha guessed. "Only the noble themselves have been allowed to leave the docks. The rest of the crew isn't allowed away from the ship," Roderick explained. "Food will still be brought to them, but the harbor is crawling with men at all times. I've watched them, Asha. The slightest sign of trouble, and this place will have us outnumbered at least 2-1. "Sir Patrick isn't taking any chances, I see," Asha grumbled. "Let me talk to the lads and let them know, then I'll follow you inside." "Make it quick, Asha," Roderick warned. "I have a longer leash than the rest, but it's still shorter than a whore's skirt." Asha raised her eyebrow. Her uncle was one of the more well-mannered men that she knew, and would never use a metaphor so crude. He had to be truly on edge, for his manners to be cracking. "Coral." Asha barked as she climbed back into her ship. "Captain," the still beardless warrior responded, striding past the rest of the crew as they worked. "Keep a good eye on the crew," Asha ordered quietly, when Coral was close enough. "This place is a tinderbox, and we're one fool away from being lit on fire. Understand?" Coral nodded quickly. "Aye, Captain." "I'll keep the lads in line," he promised. Asha clapped the man on the arm before returning to her uncle, nodding to him to let him know that she was ready. "Let's see what all the ruckus is."
line break.
"Ah, a Shekre joy. I knew someone was missing." Sarah Patrick Mallister mused as Asha and her uncle entered Seagard's great hall. The other Ironborn lords sat alone at a table on Sir Patrick's left side. Asha nodded to them as she made her way towards the chair where the knight lounged. All around the room, more Mallister men-at-arms stood on guard, their hands on their weapons and their eyes glaring at their guests.
Sir Patrick.
Asha said when she and her uncle were close enough. "Thank you for receiving us." "Well, I thought it was a joke when I got a raven from Winterfell telling me to expect men from the Iron Islands," the knight explained. "I stopped laughing the moment your uncle's ship was spotted." Sir Patrick straightened in his chair and leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. It was now that Asha realized that the knight wasn't wearing any fine silks or velvets. He wore a studded vest and heavy leather gauntlets on his hands. At his side, Asha made out the handle of a dagger at his side, and a longsword leaned against one of the armrests of his seat. "The question is, what took you so long?" "Got sent a shitmaster," Asha answered honestly. "Fucker forgot to check the ravens for 2 days, and I got the message from Winterfell days after the others." Sir Patrick nodded slowly. "I see. What exactly did the message say?" "That Benjen Stark is riding towards River Run, and asked that I be there to see what he has," Asha answered. "Something about proof of a threat beyond the wall." "I received the same along with the message telling me to expect your friends," Sir Patrick said, gesturing to the other lords. "It seems that you lot will accompany me to River Run." "Was the message sent to you specifically?" Uncle asked curiously. Sir Patrick shook his head. "It was addressed to the lords of the Riverlands. Others must have got it as well." "Do we have any idea what Stark has?" Asha asked. "No," Septa Thatch answered, "but it caused quite a stir in Winterfell from what I've heard. There's also been word that some lords are slowly mobilizing their men." "Has there not?" Uncle Roderick pointed. "There has," Septimic said, but the men of the north have always been protective of the wall much more than us below the neck. The knight leaned back in his chair. I'm sure whatever it is, Benjen Stark will ask us to send aid to our neighbors and friends. The North and the Riverlands have been staunch allies since Robert's rebellion, and none were hit harder than the Northmen in the war, he explained. Whatever the threat is, I have no doubt that it will be easily sent back into the frozen hell from which it came. Why do you say that? Asha asked. My great-uncle is the commander of the Shadow Tower, Ser Patrek said. He still sends regular updates. Last I heard, the strength of the Watch has increased substantially through prisoners from the last war, and the resources sent from the rest of Westeros has helped rebuild at least one other castle in Greygard. How bad was it before? Asha asked. She had never truly paid attention to the wall before. She had been too busy taking over as her father's heir, proving herself to be a true Ironborn. The wall had less than 1,000 men, and the 3 castles that were still in use, Castle Black, Eastwatch by the Sea, and the Shadow Tower, all severely undermanned. Roderick explained grimly. The only recruits the Watch could get were from the dredges of dungeons, all across Westeros. Now they have quite the influx of trained soldiers. Ser Patrek added. It now helps that the king has ordered his men in the Riverlands to give any bandits they capture the option of the wall, or rebuild villages and towns harmed during the war. The knight shrugged. Between hard labor and being fucking freezing, you'd be surprised with how many choose to go north. It's no secret that the Night's Watch is back on the rise under King Robb. So why do they need us? Asha asked, gesturing to herself and the other Ironborn lords. A question you can ask Benjen Stark when he arrives, Lady Greyjoy, Ser Patrek said. We ride out tomorrow. It takes a little over a week to reach Riverrun from here. I hope you're as good in the saddle as you are on the waves. What about our crews? Asha asked. They stay here, Ser Patrek answered immediately, leaving no room for argument. I will not have hundreds of Ironborn tramping through the Riverlands. We're noble, sir, Asha said, his title tasting odd in her mouth. We will not go riding off into the Riverlands without some sort of retinue. Ser Patrek frowned and looked ready to reject her immediately again, but he waited a moment before leaning forward, gazing sternly at her. You all may take 1 man, he said, holding up a single finger. 1. Understood. Asha nodded. It is. Thank you. Good, Ser Patrek said, getting to his feet and grabbing his sword, sliding it back into his sheath. My steward will show you to your room. You'll be told when supper is ready as well, he said before striding out of the room. Asha looked at her uncle, who looked to be thinking hard. Benjen Stark is Ned Stark's brother, isn't he? He is, Roderick answered, looking at her. He's also the first ranger of the Night's Watch. It's very strange why he's the one riding south. Why's that? Asha asked. Because he's usually north of the wall scouting the wildlings, her uncle answered grimly. Whatever he has, it has to be more dangerous than wildlings if he's riding the wrong direction.